This is a crankshaft rotation video for the General Pump Model 66 series. The tools and supplies needed for this repair are a power driver, a 6mm hex, a 5mm hex, a 3-inch ratchet extension, a ratchet wrench, a rubber mallet, a 24mm wrench, 2 pry bars, and a torque wrench. Please note that the oil needs to be drained prior to performing the crankshaft rotation. Use a 5mm hex to remove the rear cover. Use a 6mm hex to remove the bolts from the connecting rod caps. Remove the rod caps. It's important to note that when reinstalling the rod caps, they need to be replaced to the same rod as they were removed. Insert the handle end of the rubber mallet into the crankcase as shown. Tap lightly on the mallet to push the connecting rods down as far as the crankcase will allow. Use a 6mm hex to remove the seal side cover bolts. Use 2 pry bars to loosen the seal side cover from the crankcase. Remove the seal side cover. Use a 6mm hex to remove the opposite side cover bolts. Use 2 pry bars to loosen the opposite side cover from the crankcase. Remove the opposite side cover. Carefully remove the crankshaft by rotating it while removing it from the crankcase. Flip the crankshaft and insert it into the opposite side. Seating the crankshaft properly into the bottom connecting rod caps. Flip the side covers so they properly correspond to the rotated crankshaft. Replace the crankshaft side oil cover seal. Snapping it into place. Use a 6mm hex to tighten the bolts. Use a torque wrench to tighten the bolts to the specifications. Replace the opposite side cover, snapping it into place. Be careful to not damage the crankshaft side oil cover seal. Tighten the bolts using a 6mm hex. Use a torque wrench to tighten the bolts to the specifications. Use a 24mm wrench to turn the crankshaft to allow for easier replacement of the connecting rod caps. Be sure the correct cap is applied to the original connecting rod cap from which it was removed. Use a torque wrench to tighten the connecting rod cap bolts to the specifications. Fill the crankcase with a proper amount of Series 100 oil. Check the rear cover O-ring placement and install the cover. Insert and tighten the bolts with a 5mm hex. Use a torque wrench to tighten the bolts to the specifications.